The emergency light was blinking in corridor 16, and I knew that was wrong. Wrong in a way that made my stomach turn. Wrong in a way that shouldn't be possible. 23 years working at Installation Sigma. 23 years keeping the servers running. 23 years ensuring that the 347,000 stored consciousnesses continued existing in their virtual realities. And never, ever, had an emergency light blinked in corridor 16. Because corridor 16 didn't exist. I stopped in the middle of the main tunnel, the electronic clipboard still in my hand, my eyes fixed on that side passage that definitely wasn't there yesterday. The reinforced steel door was ajar, maybe 15 centimeters open, and from that empty space emanated that intermittent red light that made the concrete walls seem to pulse like a heart. I knew every inch of that installation, every corridor, every room, every server. I had memorized the architectural plans during initial training, had walked these underground tunnels thousands of times over more than 2 decades. And that corridor simply didn't exist. But it was there. I looked at the clipboard. The maintenance report showed the same as always. Weekly verification routine of refrigeration systems, backup generator checks, radiation level monitoring. Everything absolutely normal. Everything exactly as it should be in a bunker designed to keep humanity's last hope functioning for centuries. Humanity's last hope. I swallowed hard. Sometimes, when I was alone in the server chambers, when the constant hum of fans and the bluish glow of status LEDs were my only company, I thought about those 347,000 people. I thought that each blinking light represented a human consciousness, a life, a person who had chosen to abandon the world outside to exist forever in a perfect simulation. 347,000 people who had fled the apocalypse. I took another step toward the ajar door. My right hand gripped the clipboard tighter. The left went instinctively to the ID badge hanging from my neck. The badge that gave me access to, well, almost everything in the installation. Almost. There were restricted areas. There always were. Rooms marked with yellow and black stripes that only alpha-level personnel could access. I was beta-level, senior maintenance technician, authorized to move freely through most of Installation Sigma. But not everything. That door had no yellow and black stripes. That door had no markings at all. I moved closer. The red light kept blinking. 1 second on, 1 second off. A constant rhythm that seemed synchronized with the beats of my own heart. I extended my hand, hesitated, and then pushed the door. The metal slid without making a sound. Perfectly lubricated hinges. And on the other side, a corridor identical to the others. Concrete walls, exposed pipes on the ceiling, embedded LED fixtures every 5 meters. Absolutely standard. Absolutely normal. Except for the emergency light that continued blinking at the end, about 50 meters ahead, marking a door that I was absolutely certain shouldn't exist. I entered. The air was different in there. Colder. More dense. As if the atmospheric pressure was slightly higher. I felt my ears pop on the 3rd step. That sensation of when you're in an elevator descending very fast. But I wasn't descending. I was walking in a straight line. My footsteps echoed strangely. The sound hit the walls and came back, but with a delay that made no sense, as if the corridor was much longer than it appeared, as if the space inside didn't correspond to the dimensions my eyes were seeing. I stopped. My training screamed at me to turn around, to go back to the main tunnel, to report the anomaly to the shift supervisor, to follow protocol. But there was something about that blinking red light, something that pulled me forward, something that whispered in the back of my mind that I needed to see what was on the other side of that door. I kept walking. 30 steps, 40. The corridor seemed to stretch as I advanced, as if each meter traveled added 2 more meters ahead, But that was impossible. It had to be a trick of perspective. Or maybe I was more tired than I thought. 23 years of 12-hour shifts. 23 years of self-imposed solitude. 23 years without seeing sunlight? No. I shook my head. I couldn't think like that. The sun outside was dead. The world outside was dead. That's why I was here. That's why Installation Sigma existed. To preserve what remained of humanity until when, exactly? The question arose in my mind like a cold needle. I had never stopped to think about it, had never questioned. The apocalypse had happened. How long ago? 30 years? 40? The record said the Sigma event had occurred in 2027. And now it was, I didn't know what year it was. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had no idea what year I was living in. There were no calendars in the installation, no temporal markers, just the shifts that repeated eternally. The same work, the same routine, day after day after day. I reached the door. The emergency light was right above, blinking, blinking. And I realized it wasn't a normal emergency light. It was different. The glass was opaque. The color was too red. And when it blinked, for a fraction of a second, I swore I saw something inside it. Something that moved. Something that... I looked away, focused on the door. It had no markings either. Just a small plate on the side. A plate I couldn't read properly because the letters seemed blurred. No, not blurred. The letters were sharp, but my eyes couldn't focus on them. It was like trying to read something through running water. I blinked several times. The letters continued refusing to make sense. So I extended my hand, pressed my thumb on the biometric sensor next to the plate, and the door opened. It shouldn't have opened. My access level didn't authorize entry into unmapped areas, but the door slid to the side as if it had been waiting for me, as if it always knew I would come, and I entered a room that changed everything. It was small, maybe 5 meters by 5. In the center was a console, a single workstation with 3 monitors forming a semicircle. The monitors were on. Data rolled down the screens in cascades of numbers and symbols I didn't recognize. It wasn't binary code. It wasn't hexadecimal. It was something else. But it wasn't the console that made me stop breathing. It was the window. There was a window on the opposite wall. A large window, floor to ceiling, thick transparent glass. And through it I could see the world outside. And the world outside was perfectly fine. I staggered to the window. My legs barely supported me. My fingers touched the glass, cold, solid, real. And my eyes couldn't process what they were seeing. A city. No, a metropolis. Skyscrapers rising against a crystalline blue sky. Cars on the streets. People on the sidewalks. Planes in the air. Luminous billboards. Flower beds. Everything absolutely normal. Absolutely alive. There was no radiation. No ashes. No devastation. The apocalypse had never happened. I felt my brain start to shut down. It was automatic defense. A protection mechanism against a truth that couldn't, that shouldn't, that made no sense. But then I saw the clock. A giant digital clock on top of one of the buildings, displaying date and time. And the date was 2051, March 20th, 2:37 in the afternoon. 24 years after the supposed Sigma event. 24 years, and the world was perfectly intact. I turned slowly, very slowly, and looked at the console in the center of the room. My feet moved on their own. I no longer had control. It was as if someone else was piloting my body. Someone who knew exactly what to do. Someone who had done this before. I sat in the chair. I touched the keyboard. The monitors reacted instantly, and I started reading. The files were all there, organized, waiting, as if someone knew I would come, as if someone had prepared everything specifically for this moment. Quantum Refuge Project, Alpha Phase, Maximum Classification. I clicked, read, and with each line, each paragraph, each revelation, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Installation Sigma wasn't a survival bunker. It was a training center. The 347,000 consciousnesses stored on the servers weren't refugees from an apocalypse that never happened. They were volunteers. People who had agreed to participate in an experiment that involved— I read the sentence 3 times before I could process it. Neurological adaptation for non-Euclidean environments through prolonged exposure and quantum simulation. I scrolled the screen, kept reading. The simulations weren't virtual paradises. They were testing environments, impossible worlds where geometry didn't obey normal laws of space, places where corridors bent upon themselves, where rooms existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, where the very notion of space was fluid, malleable, wrong. And human consciousnesses were being trained to survive in these environments, because something out there needed them. I opened another file. This one had an attached video. I clicked. The image showed a conference room. 5 people sitting around a table, all wearing suits, all with serious expressions. One of them, a woman around 50 years old, gray hair tied in a bun, began speaking. Official record. August 23, 2026, Executive Committee meeting of the Refuge Project. Present, Dr. Helena Suarez, Scientific Coordinator, Dr. Marcus Chen, Head of Operations, General Amanda Torres, Military Consultant, Dr. Rafael Medeiros, Quantum Physics Specialist, and myself, Dr. Isabella Fonseca, General Director. The woman paused. Her eyes looked tired. The portal has been confirmed. The readings are unequivocal. There is an opening in the fabric of space-time, located approximately 320 kilometers above Earth's surface. The opening leads to, well, to a place our instruments cannot adequately map, a place where the laws of physics we know don't apply. Another man, Dr. Raphael, leaned forward. The probes we sent through the portal didn't return, but we managed to capture signals before losing contact. Signals indicating life, structures, civilization. Something built things in there. Something that exists. On the other side. Dr. Isabella took a deep breath. The question we face is simple. The portal is expanding. Our calculations suggest that in approximately 50 years, it will be large enough to, well, to directly interact with Earth. We don't know what will happen when that occurs. We don't know if it's a threat or an opportunity. But we know one thing. She looked directly at the camera. We cannot send physical ships to explore what exists inside. The space beyond the portal doesn't obey Euclidean geometry. Our ships disintegrate when trying to navigate there. But human consciousnesses, uploaded consciousnesses, operating through specially designed drones, those can function. Because human consciousnesses are adaptable, plastic, capable of reinterpreting impossible sensory information and finding meaning where there should be none. She paused. That's why we created the Refuge Project, to train human consciousnesses to operate in environments that defy the very notion of reality, to prepare them to explore, to map, to understand what exists on the other side. The video ended. I stared at the black screen. My thoughts moved very slowly. as if they were moving through molasses. I was trying to process, trying to understand. Then I saw another file. This one had my name. Carvalho Roberto Cycle 43. I clicked, and everything collapsed. I wasn't a maintenance technician. I was one of the volunteers. My consciousness had been uploaded. I read the date, 19 years ago, and since then, had lived 43 cycles, 43 versions of the same simulation, 43 times working at Installation Sigma, 43 times keeping the servers running, 43 times believing I was protecting humanity's last hope. But each cycle was slightly different. In each cycle, the installation's geometry changed. Corridors appeared where they shouldn't exist. Rooms folded upon themselves. Space became fluid. And I, the simulated Roberto, had to learn to navigate through it. Had to adapt my mind to accept impossibilities. Had to reinterpret my perception of reality to function in an environment that made no sense. Training. Everything was training. And this Cycle 43 was the final test. I read the parameters, read the objectives, read what was expected of me. And then, very slowly, I stood up from the chair. I looked at the window, at the city outside, at the world that seemed so real, so normal, so perfectly intact. But now I knew the truth. That city wasn't real. That window wasn't a window. And the world outside was just another layer of the simulation. I walked to the door, exited the room, entered corridor 16, the corridor that didn't exist, and started walking. And as I walked, as my steps echoed in that impossible space, I started noticing things. The way the walls weren't exactly parallel. The way the distance between the light fixtures varied, even though visually they seemed uniformly spaced. The way my shadow fell at angles that didn't correspond to the position of the lights. Small impossibilities, small violations of natural laws, things that an untrained mind, an unprepared mind, would simply ignore. But I, after 43 cycles, after 19 years being molded, was beginning to see. I reached the end of the corridor. The door that led back to the main tunnel was there. But now, when I looked at it, I could see something more. I could see the lines of code that formed the texture of the metal. I could see the algorithms that governed how light reflected on the surface. I could see through the simulation, and beyond it. Beyond it there was... I extended my hand, touched the door, and for a moment, for an infinitesimal fraction of a second, I felt something else. I felt a texture that wasn't metal. I felt a temperature that made no sense. I felt... The door opened. But on the other side wasn't the main tunnel. On the other side was another place. A place where the corridor bent upward and downward simultaneously. Where the walls were made of angles that didn't exist in normal three-dimensional space. Where light came from impossible directions and created shadows that had more dimensions than they should. And in the center of that impossible space, floating, or perhaps supported by something my eyes couldn't perceive, there was a figure, humanoid, more or less. It had the general shape of a person, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but everything was wrong. The proportions didn't match. The limbs bent at joints that shouldn't exist. And the skin, if that was skin, seemed to change texture every second. Sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes made of something that wasn't matter at all. The figure looked at me and spoke, but not with words, not with sounds. The communication happened directly in my mind, a transfer of pure concepts, of meanings without language. And I, surprisingly, understood. You passed. I blinked. My voice, when I finally managed to speak, came out weak. Past what? The training. 43 cycles, 19 subjective years. Your consciousness was molded, adapted, prepared. Now you can see, can perceive, can exist. Here. Here. Where? The figure made a gesture. The arm movement created trails in the air, as if space itself was folding around the movement. The place beyond the portal, the place where we exist, the place that your species, soon, will need to understand. I took a step back, or tried to, but I realized that back wasn't a direction that made sense in that environment. My foot landed on something that was simultaneously above and beside it, and somehow, that felt right. You're not human. It wasn't a question. No. But I'm also not alien, in the way your species uses the term. We didn't come from another planet. We came from another angle. Another angle? Your reality, the reality you call universe, is three-dimensional. Length, width, height. But there are more dimensions. Directions you can't see. Spaces that exist perpendicular to what you call existence. And we live there. The figure moved, floated, walked. I couldn't define it. But it approached. And the closer it got, the more I could see. See that it wasn't a single entity. It was multiple. Several versions of the same figure existing simultaneously in the same place. Or perhaps it was a single entity that existed at multiple points in space-time at once. The portal is opening. In approximately 26 years of your linear time, it will be large enough for our worlds to touch. And when that happens, we'll need intermediaries. We'll need consciousnesses that can exist on both sides. I felt something cold spread through my chest, or through what I perceived as my chest. Did I still have a body? Or was it just the memory of a body? A neural ghost of something that no longer existed? Intermediaries for what? To avoid misunderstandings. Your species, when it encounters the unknown, often reacts with fear, with violence. We don't want that. And you shouldn't want that either. The figure extended something that looked like a hand. Fingers, or maybe tentacles, or maybe just extensions of a visual concept my mind was translating as fingers, touched the air in front of me, and space opened. Like a curtain being pulled, like a door being unlocked, like something that had no analogy in any human experience. And on the other side, I saw the place those beings came from. I saw cities built in impossible geometries. I saw structures that extended through dimensions that had no name. I saw life, intelligence, civilization, existing in forms that made the strangest things on Earth seem mundane. And I saw other humans. No, not humans. Human consciousnesses, operating through bodies, vehicles, manifestations, something that allowed them to exist in that impossible space, moving, exploring, learning, working. 346,983 human consciousnesses have already completed the training, all operational, all functioning as bridges between our realities. And now, you are the 347,000. The opening closed, space returned to normal, or whatever passed for normal in that place. I looked at the figure, tried to process, tried to understand. And what if I don't want to? Don't want what? To be a bridge, to be an intermediary. What if I want to go back? Go back to my real body. Go back to the real world. The figure remained motionless for a long moment. Then, that communication without words returned. Your physical body was disconnected from life support 13 years ago. The chances of successful neurological reversal after that period are statistically 0. Silence. You signed the terms. You agreed. March 17th, 2032. You entered the upload chamber voluntarily. You knew there was no return. I felt something. It wasn't quite an emotion. It was deeper, more fundamental. It was the sensation of being suspended over an abyss, knowing the fall was inevitable, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. But I don't remember. No. Each cycle erases the memories of the previous cycle. It's part of the training. It's part of the process. Memories create rigidity, expectations, fixed thought patterns. To adapt a human consciousness to non-Euclidean environments, flexibility is necessary. It's necessary to rebuild the perception of reality repeatedly until it becomes malleable. The figure moved closer. You passed. You're ready. Now, you can choose. Choose what? Your next step. You can accept. You can take your place as an intermediary. You can begin working on the bridge between our civilizations. Or you can restart. Cycle 44. All memories erased. Everything back to the beginning. You wake up as a maintenance technician at Installation Sigma. You believe in the apocalypse. You believe you're protecting humanity. And, eventually, you find Corridor 16 again. And start over. I looked around, at that impossible space, at that figure that shouldn't exist, at everything I had learned, everything I had discovered, in the last hours, days. How much time had passed since I entered that corridor? I didn't know. And then, very slowly, I asked the only question that really mattered. The other consciousnesses, the other 346,000 people, do they know? Do they remember who they were? What they were? Yes. After completing the training, the memories are restored, partially, enough to maintain continuity of identity, enough so they still consider themselves human. And are they happy? The figure seemed to consider the question, or perhaps was consulting something, someone, somewhere I couldn't perceive. Happiness is a complex concept, but they have purpose, they have function, they have the sensation of being, contributing to something greater than themselves, to the future of two civilizations. That is the closest to happiness that a consciousness without a physical body can achieve. I closed my eyes, or made the mental movement that corresponded to closing eyes. I wasn't sure if I still had real eyes. I thought about 23 years of work, 23 years of solitude, 23 years believing I was saving humanity, without knowing humanity had never needed saving. I thought about 43 cycles, 43 versions of myself living the same lie, 43 times being molded, trained, prepared, without knowing what was coming. And I thought about what awaited me if I accepted. An eternity serving as a bridge between two worlds. An eternity existing in a space that defied everything my human brain considered real. An eternity without a body, without touch, without warmth, without all the small physical sensations that define what it means to be alive, but with purpose, with function, with the certainty that I was doing something important, something necessary. Or I could restart. I could forget everything again. I could go back to being maintenance technician Roberto Carvalho, could go back to believing the comfortable lie, could live a few more subjective years of simulated normalcy before eventually, inevitably, discovering everything again, and have to make the same choice, again, and again, and again. I opened my eyes. I looked at the figure, and said, "I accept." The words came out before I could think about them, as if some part of me, some deep part, already knew the answer from the beginning. The figure smiled. It was hard to tell, but something in its posture changed, something that communicated approval. "Welcome, intermediary number 347,000. Your transition will begin now." And the world exploded. Not in violence, not in pain, but in expansion, in revelation, in a sudden and overwhelming influx of sensory information that had no precedent in any human experience. I felt my consciousness stretch, perceive more, see more, exist in more places simultaneously. I saw Installation Sigma as it really was. Not an underground bunker, but an interface, a connection point between realities, a place where normal three-dimensional space touched, tangent, the multi-dimensional space beyond. I saw the other consciousnesses, all 346,000, working. Some building structures, some mapping territory, some simply existing, serving as anchors to keep the connection stable. I saw the portal, that opening in the fabric of reality, that point where two universes touched, and I saw, beyond it, the place those beings came from. And it was beautiful, in a strange and alien and completely incomprehensible way, but beautiful. Structures that glowed with light coming from dimensions that had no name. Life forms that existed partially in multiple realities simultaneously. Music, if that could be called music. That was made of pure mathematics and resonated through space-time itself. And I felt peace. Not the peace of someone who found answers, but the peace of someone who accepted they would never have all the answers. And that was okay. I accepted that I was small, that I was just one consciousness among millions, that in the grand scheme of things, I didn't matter much. But I also accepted that even being small, even being insignificant, I could still do something. I could be useful. I could contribute. I could be a bridge. And maybe that was enough. The transition continued. I felt my perception of myself begin to change, begin to adapt, begin to accept that I was no longer exactly human. But I also wasn't exactly something else. I was something in between, something hybrid, something new. And as my consciousness expanded, as I began to perceive the universe in ways I never imagined possible, I, Roberto Carvalho, maintenance technician at Installation Sigma, volunteer of the Quantum Refuge Project, intermediary number 347,000, smiled. Because finally, after 43 cycles, after 19 years, after a journey I didn't even know I was taking, I had found my place. Not in the world I knew. Not in the world I thought I understood. But in a place between worlds. In an impossible space. In a refuge that wasn't exactly a refuge, but something much, much larger. And as I took my first step, my true first step, in that expanded reality, Installation Sigma kept functioning. The servers kept processing. The consciousnesses kept existing, and somewhere, in a corridor that didn't exist until someone needed to find it, an emergency light blinked. Waiting. Always waiting. For the next one who was ready. For the next one who would pass the test. For the next one who would become a bridge. Because the portal was opening. And when it finally opened completely, humanity, in all its forms, physical and digital, would need to be ready for what came next.